Hello, and welcome to this quick plays video on bluff squeezing preflop. The truth of the matter is that we are dealt garbage starting cards way more often than hands like queens and aces, but the good news is that we can turn those junky starting hands into easy profit with a good bluff squeezing strategy. In this video you will learn what a squeeze is, what to consider before squeezing, and little details you can tweak to make this play even more profitable. First, what is a squeeze? A squeeze is when there is a preflop raise, one or more callers, and then a 3-bet, which is considered the squeeze. So if we take this hand where early position opens to 3, middle position calls 3, and the cutoff folds, hero could re-raise and squeeze. If the cutoff had called as well, this would also be a squeeze opportunity, but if both middle position and the cutoff had folded, this would not be a squeeze opportunity. The whole point of a squeeze is to 3-bet and squeeze out the dead money from callers who likely have weaker hands. Which brings us nicely to the considerations we want to analyze before squeezing. These considerations include player considerations, which look at who the open raiser is and how they will likely react to a squeeze, who the caller is or callers are and how they will likely react to a squeeze, and who the players left to act are and how they are likely to react to a squeeze. Then we also check our hole cards, and lastly, we consider the squeeze size and how that influences the break-even percentage and likely folds. At first, this list may seem daunting, with so many things to consider before making a simple squeeze. But in reality, we want to be considering these things in every hand, so this list should become second nature and something you always consider before making any preflop action. Let's go right in order with our considerations and start with the open raiser. Start by thinking about the hands he likely open raised and then which hands he'd continue with if we squeezed. If he open raises very tight, say 7s plus, ace queen plus, then he likely won't fold very often against our squeeze. When we are bluff squeezing, our major goal is to generate folds, and ideally to get those folds preflop so we can just pick up an easy pot and move on to the next hand. The ideal open raiser to squeeze is a player who will fold a large chunk of their open raising range. So a player who open raises 12% of hands and would only continue against our squeeze with jacks plus ace king, or 3% of hands, is folding 75% of the time, which is great for us. But if he'd only fold against our squeeze 50% of the time or less, I'm not very likely to squeeze him with a junky hand. Next we want to consider the caller, or callers if there are multiple. What kind of hands did they call the open raise with, and how would they react if we squeezed? If he called an open raise with a typical range including hands like small pairs and suited connectors, is he likely to call or fold against our squeeze? These hands typically cannot stand up to the pressure of a squeeze, and even less so out of position. Of course we are very happy if he just folds preflop, again, allowing us to pick up an easy preflop pot. But if he's going to call, how will he play postflop? Is he going to call the open raise and squeeze with 3s? And if so, is he going to check fold the flop when he misses his set? Or is he fishy and won't ever fold anything postflop? Against fishy callers, I'm going to keep my squeeze range strong and value heavy, since a fish isn't likely to fold preflop nor postflop reliably enough for me to bluff him. As a general rule, I suggest being more and more selective as there are more and more callers. The more callers there are, the more players we need to get to fold, which can be very tricky to do. Focus on squeezing players who call open raises with set minds or drawing hands and will fold them to the pressure of a squeeze. If they fold those kinds of hands to a squeeze, you can expect a very large percentage of preflop folds, which is the goal when making this kind of bluff. Also take a quick glance at the players left to act in the hand. In this situation, that's the small blind and big blind. As a general rule, I dislike bluff squeezing here with huge fish in the blinds. Because if that fish calls, then 1, we didn't get everyone to fold preflop to pick up that easy preflop pot, and 2, it becomes more likely that EP and MP will both call as well, getting better pot odds and a chance to stack a fish. With tighter players and unknowns, I usually assume they will fold a very large percentage of the time, because our squeeze looks very strong, but be selective with fish and players with zero preflop discipline. Checking the players behind you is just good practice, and something you want to get in the habit of doing regardless of what preflop action you are making. The last two things to consider are our cards and the actual size of our squeeze. To figure out the size, I use the rule 3.5x plus 0.5x per caller. So with one color I will squeeze 4x the open raise size, with two colors 4.5x the open raise size, etc. As with any sizing formula, this is really just a starting point. In this situation, a normal squeeze size would be to $12, 4 times the $3 open raise size with a single color. But always ask yourself if going larger or smaller would be more beneficial. For instance, if they would fold regardless of the squeeze size, couldn't we get the squeeze away for just $11 instead? On the contrary, also consider spots where you may need to make your squeeze just a tad larger to generate those preflop folds often enough. Just to simply understand how the bet size works into the profitability of the squeeze, we can figure out the break-even percentage of the squeeze to ensure it will work enough of the time to be plus EV. When analyzing a bluff squeeze, I look for outright profitability, meaning that my opponents will fold often enough right now for my squeeze to be plus EV. The break-even percentage formula is simply risk divided by risk plus reward, where the risk is our squeeze size and the reward is what's in the pot right now. So in this spot, that would mean $12 divided by 12 plus 750 equals 62%. So if we expect to get folds at least 62% of the time preflop, this is an outright profitable squeeze. And of course, if you risk less money, you need less folds, and if you risk more money, then you need more folds to break even. The last consideration is our hand. Most of the hands we are dealt will fit into the bluff category, where we are very happy if everyone folds and we just pick up the pot preflop. And if we expect to get folds that often preflop, then our whole cards don't really matter that much, right? Who cares if we have 8-5 off, Ace-3 off, or Queen-9 suited? So long as we can bluff squeeze and pick up the pot, we're very happy. Now some hands certainly play better than others. For one, if we get called preflop, I'd rather have Queen-9 suited going postflop than 6-3 off. But we can also consider blockers. A blocker is a card that limits how many combos of a certain hand villain can have. For instance, in this hand we have King-3 suited, which blocks combos of Ace-King from 16 down to 12, and blocks combos of Kings from 6 down to 3. Hands like Ace-X and King-X are usually great hands to use because they limit the number of super strong combos that open raisers wouldn't fold to a squeeze. And if we have to go post-flop, Ace-X and King-X have decent equity. Even against Jacks, our King-3 suited has 31% equity, much better than the 12% equity of 8 deuce off or 18% equity of 10-7 suited. I prefer using hands with blockers, like Ace-X or King-X, and even more so if they are suited, giving our hand a little more equity and playability. Of course, if my opponents will fold often, I will squeeze lots of other hands and just fight for the pot regardless of my cards. The more difficult question is how to react with hands like small pairs and suited connectors. Is it more valuable to turn them into bluffs and squeeze them preflop, or should we just call the preflop raise and try to smash the flop? If the players involved are fish, I'm much more apt to just call and try to stack them postflop. But if they are the kind of players who won't pay off much postflop, I'm more apt to just squeeze the pot preflop and try to pick up the pot right there. While there are many things we want to consider before bluff squeezing, you may be surprised how many good squeeze spots you've been passing up. I don't suggest forcing squeezes, or even looking to squeeze at X percentage, but with some extra awareness, squeeze spots will make themselves very apparent. Good squeezes are an easy way to make money with hands you would otherwise fold, and will also make you a tougher opponent to play against. Practice looking for good bluff squeeze spots in your own games, and go down that checklist to ensure you are making easy profit with those ugly cards. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, good luck and happy grinding.